Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Streamline Capital. Very excited to have our guest today. We got none other than Jason Yarusi with us. So, Jason, welcome.
Hey, Brian. It's great to be here. Great to connect again.
Yep, absolutely. And, for the listeners, Jason, I think this is his third time on the podcast. His wife, Peely's also been on the podcast once or twice as well. So, welcome back. I'm excited to catch up and see what's been going on. So, that said, why don't you do us a favor? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of weave a tale on how you got into multifamily.
Yeah, so like any good husband, I have to come on the podcast 3 times to give as much value as she did as one. So I'd go back and listen to hers because you'll just get about 30% here, but we'll do our
Yeah.
best, right? So honestly, I grew up in New Jersey. I'm here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I moved down here about 4.5 years ago. Just wanted a little bit of change of life, right? And we were just in the middle of COVID and all those pieces with some little kids. So made a move down here. And, while up in New Jersey, went to school for sports, and then on that part started transitioning other things in life, and just wasn't really finding anything that was fulfilling. Right, I got a business degree, left college, didn't have really any motivation to go into finance. Right, that's what my degree was for. I was in New Jersey, right off of New York City, and then I moved in New York City, really just working odd jobs. Right, so just whatever job was in front of me, everything from construction to just like writing education papers to like working in bars. Right, just trying to figure it out, as I'm sure people are, whether now or many times in their life. And what that led me to is that just a lot of things that I didn't like doing. And so you get starting a rhythm, you get stuck in a rhythm, and you continue to do that because you don't know what else to do. So I was working in bars for a number of years, worked in restaurants, all different kinds of things, right? I was in arts, doing traveling some bit, just picking up odd jobs, just, move from the next thing to the next thing. And it
Yeah.
finally got to one night where I was just so unhappy with where I was. And ultimately, I was leaving a bar on my bike, and I got hit by a car just like going home like 2:33 in the morning. It was just like this, like
Now,
crazy
bicycle, bike, or
on a
motorcycle bike?
bicycle.
Okay.
Yeah,
To me,
on my
that's
bike.
I
Yeah.
spend a lot of time on two wheels and I got both, but
Got it.
it's
Fair
an
enough.
important detail.
Yeah.
Anyway, go
Well,
ahead. Sorry.
just, in the dark, it's Second
Yeah.
Avenue, New York City, 2:33 in the morning, and get hit by a car, and the car takes off, right? And I end up getting pulled out of the street, put in an ambulance, and next thing I know, I'm, a couple days later, and get out of the hospital with stitches, some broken bones, a pin in my wrist, just like random things. But my thought was like, man, I got to get back to this job that I absolutely despise because I need to make money for rent. You think about that, you put that whole sentence together, you say, okay, that's just a crazy thought. All you want to do is not be where you are, and now all you're thinking about after this is going back to where you don't want to be. And I kind of made an agreement with myself that if I was going to go and just continue to follow this route, then I had to stop complaining with where I am and just say,
Mhm.
okay, this is where you are, or start making some changes. And
Mhm.
so, the question is what change to make? And
Mhm.
that's usually on most of the tip of the tongue of most people who are here looking for a change. Is like, what should I do? And I didn't know that answer, but I knew I couldn't continue to do what I was doing. Do
Mhm.
chaotic things, get chaotic results. Like, why be shocked?
Yeah.
So ultimately, I just started to change in the opposite of what I was doing. Stop staying out really late. Stop drinking all the time. Stop doing all these things. Stop getting up late. So I started getting up earlier. Have a set routine. Started working out religiously. Started doing things that
Yeah.
just were in complete contrast to where I was. And slowly, surely, surprisingly, not surprisingly, right? Things started to
Yeah.
change in a way that would create more value to me, right? It just the presence of life just changed in a way that things started to look sunnier. So I
Yeah.
went from working those bars. I found the way to open up a bar, open up a restaurant. I had opened a brewery and ended up selling that brewery. Right, just started doing things that got me away from the transactional side.
Mhm.
And then at that time, it was about 2009, 10. Hurricane Sandy happened, and we're right off New Jersey. That hurricane decimated the East Coast. My father had a business that was really specialized, like really for construction business, so specialized that he would like lift and move homes. And so
Yeah.
the need for that was it's not something you do every day, right? So he'd have like, 10 or 12 calls a month. Well, Hurricane Sandy happens, all these people's houses flood. The whole thing is FEMA's going to force everybody to lift their houses to become FEMA compliant and get out of the flood zone. My dad's little business goes from, that 10, 12 calls a month to like 1,000 a day. So
Mhm.
my little brother was working for me. My now wife Peely was with me, and we moved
Yeah.
out to New Jersey and just helped dad take on the construction business. And
Mhm.
we did that for, a good 4 or 5 years where we did like
Yeah.
2,000 something jobs.
Mhm.
And it was fun and grazing, crazy, a bunch of Italians working together, right? All the things that come with it. But on that same front, it just, again, wasn't fulfilling because all we were doing is transactional. If there
Yeah.
was 25 hours, we would have used them. So the question being, what to do now?
Yeah.
And the word that kept coming up was real estate. My dad had talked about it. Everybody had talked about it, but nobody had done it.
Hmm.
So we just started to take steps in the direction and okay, what do we do? And so we started learning about flipping houses. So we flip houses. Okay, well, how wholesaling. Let's start wholesaling deals, right? Well, Airbnb, we'll get Airbnbs. And so we progressively started to do things, but just to find that the activity was just compounding because now we still had the construction going. Now we're doing all these
Yep.
real estate projects and we're losing time instead of gaining time. What
Hmm.
the goal is now Peely being my wife, we're now, pregnant with first or second kid, right? We were just going away from the time that we
Hmm.
wanted to get back.
Yeah.
Well, met someone who was buying large apartment buildings, who was actually a town over from me. He owned a ton of apartment buildings, basically, I think down in Texas and out in Colorado.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, how interesting of a model because they're basically putting together a business plan,
Hmm.
understanding how to implement the business plan, putting together the team that now carries the business plan forward, and then managing the management, right? Or the asset production. And so I looked at that model, and that was when it really stuck. I said, okay, I can understand that. We had done some small rentals out of state, so I understand how you could use that to your advantage, but this is the way that I could actually put all the pieces together.
Yeah.
So we really dove in on a hard lesson of just learning this process, getting together with people, finding mentors, finding things that really proactively could help push us forward.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it led us to a very good system that we, in 2016, kind of stopped everything we were doing, went full in on multifamily. In 2017, brought a 94 unit in Louisville, Kentucky. Then in about a year, we started purchasing again after we got the process down and brought about maybe 400 plus units there in Louisville before selling those and moving into other markets. And that gets us to today where,
Yeah.
since that time, we've a little about 3,500 units, mainly down here in the Southeast, a lot targeted towards
Nice.
Middle Tennessee where I am.
Yeah.
And that's our business today between invest, right? We're the investors, right? The owners of the asset. We have third party management, but we do manage about 750 out of this office. And then we're active in about 7 states, right? We are active in 7 states right now.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned something saying when you get in, you had some hard lessons, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Why did you use the word hard lessons, getting started?
Every lesson is hard and it comes down to your mind of like, I always equate it to like fitness, right?
Mhm.
People can run 100 miles and that's hard for them, and people could walk around the block and that's hard for that person, right?
Yeah.
And so it's where your mind is ready for the lessons you're learning. The same thing is a complete different spectrum for two
Yeah.
different people, right? And so when you don't know, you don't know, right? That puts you in that spot of always feeling it's hard. And then
Mhm.
it's like it becomes a speed bump 5 years from now. But at the
Yeah.
moment, you're like climbing Mount Everest. And
Yeah.
so when you think about that, you're like, man, okay, at the moment it was hard because you're trying to figure out the little questions that you don't have the answer for. And so the
Right.
valuable piece that I was able to do is just find and build a network around me where they could help answer those little questions.
Yeah.
Because lots of times we get stuck at these little things that you can't like Google, you can't like figure it
Mhm.
out, right? And that's where you get stuck. And so the lessons could be that we hired too slowly. Right
Mhm.
now we have a team, right? But Peely and I were doing everything in the beginning. And so if I'm underwriting and she's talking to investors, well, then we are not able to talk to lenders or go out there to find new
Yeah.
deals or to, be with the property manager. So there was always a lack until there wasn't a lack. And so okay, let's bring on more people. You have a part where there's two ways to hire. It's
Yeah.
usually you're so desperate that you need it now, right? Or you hire ahead of time, but then you don't have the volume yet.
Right.
And both can have their advantages and their disadvantages, right? But
Yeah.
you're simply most of us do the inverse where we wait until we desperately need to hire, then you have to find a hire.
Right, right. Yeah. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about my very first deal. Some of those hard lessons are like things that are easy for me now. Like I remember stressing over the loan, Fannie, Freddie, all these different things and acronyms and different products that I just didn't understand. And now, we go out and we buy a property. I already know exactly what loan I want on the property. It's like, okay, we're
Yeah.
going to get a bridge, we're going to get a CMBS, we're going to get, look for Life Co or whatever. But
When you think about it, it's like you don't know what tool to use,
yeah.
right? When you're first starting off, like, okay, I'm just getting a loan.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what's the purpose of the loan, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not pairing the loan. You're getting the loan because that's the step of the process, but
Mhm.
you're not getting the loan with the true indication of understanding the value of the loan you're getting, right? And so maybe, when we first two we did, we had a 10-year horizon business plan on them, right? And so we got debt. The one we had a 7-year loan, and the other we had a 10-year loan, right?
Mhm.
Well, ultimately, the market went up. We got out. So, of course, we were able to sell them at a very nice return, but we had a prohibitive prepayment that we had to pay too, right? So, in hindsight, look at it, it was a good learning lesson. It taught us a lot of lessons,
Mhm.
but did I need to do a 10-year loan up front? No. But the ideal
Yeah.
business plan, 10 years is a long time.
It
And
is.
so it goes in two parts. Like our business plan started out was 10 years. And so that's what we presented to our investors, and they understood that. They were fine with us selling early. But now we usually look at a 5 year, maybe a 7 year, but mainly a 5 year.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned that because, I made the same mistake, Our first loan was a 10-year Fannie with yield maintenance, and there was a period of time where without that pre-penalty, we could have sold and made a whole lot of money. And because of the lack of flexibility, we didn't make as much as we should have. But yeah, it's one of those where, up front, I was stressing about that decision, and now 6 years later, it's like you've learned the hard lessons already. And a lot of things are a lot easier for everybody. But I assume that's absolutely the case with you. So let's see. Going through what you were talking about, you said about 3,500 units. How did that progress? Can you go through kind of like the progression from when you started to where you are right now?
Yeah, so the first one at 94, right? And then we really did spend about a year just making sure like we really had a really solid business plan.
Mhm.
That was a great move instead of buying one the next and then just trying to figure it out, right? I didn't feel like a good steward for the investor of capital if I was to go out there and just not fully make sure the plan was crystal clear that in my front end plan was actually implementing correctly, right? So we did that. We brought 94 unit, then a 48 unit, then a 58 unit, then a 32 unit, then a 65 unit.
Mhm.
That was all like in that Louisville area. The
Yep.
48 and 58 were across the street, right? So we were able to pair them together, make
Nice.
106 out of that. One came about a year after the other. So we did that before moving to other markets, right? And when we moved into other markets, we started proactively buying in Middle Tennessee and then down in Georgia and then into the Carolinas. 90+% of this is multifamily. We then have about 300 plus units of storage, and then we have an office building. And then
Hmm.
we have two developments. One's a 13 unit that's almost complete, and then the other one is 288 units that the infrastructure is being put in right now. Those are here down here in Middle Tennessee.
Sounds like your first several were in the Louisville area. What was going through your mind when you decided to go into a different market, and how did that progress? And, looking back, would you do the same thing or would you focus market?
I mean, right now, if I knew, I would have gone to Murfreesboro, but I
Mhm.
love Murfreesboro. But in the same front, Louisville was fantastic and served us very well. For the
Mhm.
same, I was in New Jersey, right? So everything costs more, right? Price per pound is more. Price per square foot towards the rent you're going to get does not equate to what you see in other markets, right? Taxes are high, utilities are high, infrastructure is old, right? Roads are always poor, like the
Mhm.
taxes are high, right? So you look at all the things here, but you get the high appreciation, right? You always have people coming off New York City, right? But my dollar in was not going to go as far. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for a way that I could put together a system with a team on a large complex, and it was going to be a very tall order to do that on a large complex in New Jersey without having the real big infrastructure in the back end. So,
Yeah.
to buy like a 94 unit, we spent, less than $3 million to buy the thing at the time.
Seems
And
crazy now, but yeah, we
crazy,
we, we had a
right?
couple of them that size and that price too. But yeah,
Yeah. Crazy. But you look at that, right? That was the entry point, which allowed us to go in there and have a ton of runway. Now, it really helped that the building was really well cared for, right? So we were really able to focus on operations. The owner had passed away, but he had cared for the building. So we were able to go in there and just do strategic renovations, open up branding and marketing, just do things that really were able to serve the property and not focus on big construction projects, right? Even though I had that background, I didn't want to be doing that from 1,000 miles away. It
yeah,
just wasn't what I wanted to focus on. So that, and then making sure I had the right team really helped us. But I liked Louisville. Yeah, I started looking at a couple of markets. It was a mid-market, right, without being like a primary market. But it still had like a whole hum nothing to see here with population growth always at 2, 3%. It was always going up, and the jobs were cool, but the job diversity was really great, right? GE,
yeah.
UPS, FedEx, Humana, Aetna, Churchill Downs, the Yum Center. You had
Mhm.
all these different things. Amazon warehouse, like all these different things that were there. It's almost the middle of the market because you can get to New York and Seattle with a plane at the same time. So you had all these shipping facilities. So it really, from a point of jobs and workforce, was a very desirable market.
Yeah.
And randomly, my sister, the only one not living in New Jersey at the time, had moved after school. So I'd been here, and my best friend growing up was from here. So they're not looking at through the same lens I am, right? They're looking at this like what's the trendy areas and stuff. But I had inherent understanding of the market, and so I said, okay, this makes sense as a market. And so we really started diving and looking for buildings that were in the southeast and south central submarkets that had a very big workforce presence.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Lots of goodness there. So let's start looking at what's coming up ahead. I mean, you've got 3,500 units right now, and you got some other assets that are not multifamily injected in there. What's the plan for the next couple of years and coming into the future?
So we are multifamily focused.
Okay.
However, we're opportunistic when the opportunity lies within markets that we want to be in. And that mainly lies here in Middle Tennessee, right? So most of these secondary projects are, or we'll say non-primary business plan projects are right here, right in our backyard.
Yeah.
And so we've actually made a good footprint that we are able to manage them. And
Mhm.
so we've built out a management arm that really focuses on these projects.
Okay.
So multifamily, we've been really conditioned on looking for properties that are underperforming to the market, right? And
Yeah.
regardless, we've been able to brought a 375 unit in Chattanooga a month and a half ago, and it just came down that the ownership had owned it. The parents had built it in
Mhm.
1977, 1985. The
Wow.
parents built the buildings. And so the kids in their
50. Yeah.
60s, 50, maybe, yeah, I think they're right, their 60s, like
Mhm.
it was just time, right? And so we had made that connection and had that opportunity. We had done another one, 355 units, 6, 7 months before that. Very similar nature, right? They had had it for some time and they needed to move capital into another project that had need at the time. And this was one that they had a low basis. So, but both of these were able to get it at very attractive prices because they were managing it to keep it full instead of managing it to optimize the building.
Okay.
So just we have a simple formula here. We have a great team. We actually, even in my town, we manage so many assets, but we have a fantastic, like 13 out of 10 property
Mhm.
manager who manages properties here. And so they just pick them right up and just keep running.
Yeah, like it. I like that. Now you mentioned, and I'm putting connecting dots. I mean, you mentioned you're managing some in-house and some. So I assume the ones that are local are the ones that you guys are managing, and the ones that are, in some of the other 7 states are the ones you have the third party management on. Is that accurate? Or
Yes and
kind of
no.
sort of?
We typically manage the properties that don't have on-site staff.
Hmm.
I found I've built out a better system to manage properties that don't have an on-site staff than I can
Got it.
find for those managers that manage the smaller buildings. We were spending too much time managing the people to
Hmm.
manage our buildings instead of just cutting them out and doing it ourselves.
Right.
The office building, we manage a self-storage. We manage a 36 unit, a 12 unit, a 44 unit, 16 unit. 125 units, one that we manage, or a larger one, 29 unit, 20 unit. So those
Yeah.
those middle of the road buildings, we manage them in-house.
Yeah. And those can be hard to manage. I mean, you have to have the right management company to do
Yeah.
it. It can very much be hard. And I know you mentioned something like this as well, but if I'm getting, 20, 40, 60 unit apartment complex, it sure is nice if it's, parked right next to another one that I own. So,
When you can centralize your leasing, your
yeah.
marketing, your admin, and your maintenance hub, you can
Mhm.
cut down your cost dramatically.
Yeah.
Right. And so for that, but if you have a management company who's doing that, they're still giving you the cost and they're not giving you the discount. Right. But I'm able to give myself the discount to
Mhm.
optimize on property management and then still run this. And so they all might not be next door to each other, but say we have, a 44 unit in town, a 16 unit, 125 unit, we can use the same vendor sec.
Yeah.
So now we have the vendors built out that can carry the project there.
Yeah, yeah, lots of advantages. I mean, I think I'm like most multifamily owners where, I love and hate property managers, and I tell my property manager that, but there's always things that rub, things that are difficult using a third party property management, but also things that are difficult bringing in-house. So,
Are you managing in-house right now, or are you doing all third party?
we're doing all third party, eventually we'll do in-house. And you mentioned this earlier, with hiring people. I think it's going to be the same thing with bringing property management in-house. We're either going to do it proactively or we're going to get to the point to where we're so, fed up and we need to bring it in-house that we're too late on it. But we did bring property management in-house with a company that I was, formerly with in South Carolina at the 700 unit mark. How about this? Where do you think a good, line in the sand is, unit count wise, to bring that in-house?
Oh, you know what? We did it when we had just one property at first, a 36 unit in Little Rock. I was just tired of it. I just could not. The two teams I had there, was not happy with the service. We brought it in. And so I just
Yeah.
had one person running it first. And
Okay.
that was all it took is 36 units, right? I don't need 90 people. And so, and that part we said, okay, now they build a system. That's not so bad.
Hmm.
So now we can proactively, now the goal is not to do it,
Hmm.
but we do it when it benefits the property, right?
Yeah.
So my goal is not property management first, property management second. It's probably even third, right? But like we don't want to be a property management company, but we've become a property management facilitator, we'll call it. right? When it makes sense. So really, it was finding one good person. And then we've done it in ways in some of the smaller properties in some locations, we might hire a full-time maintenance person there, depending on the need for the property. And then they sometimes cross over to help on tenant relations too while they're there.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, I mean that's a problem for future Brian to solve, but at some point, I think it's going to be make sense. And we do focus on one specific metro. And so all of our properties right now are within 25 miles of each other. Most of them are
Wow.
clustered in one little 10-minute drive between three properties. But eventually, I think it's going to make sense for us to pull that trigger. So I was curious on your thoughts. Awesome, awesome. Well, we're about spot where we need to start wrapping up. I'm already asked about what's coming up. So next to last question is always, if you had to give advice to somebody starting out, what would that advice be?
You just have to act. You learn from the acting, and the acting can be anything. Like go out there and talk to someone, go meet with someone, go sit down with someone, go work for someone or intern for someone. Just do something of activity
Yeah.
because it will generate good questions. You can
Yeah.
think it all through, but the thought process misses all the actions.
Love it. Love it. And I mean, quite frankly, we talked about the hard lessons and learning, and they all came from actions, not from opening books.
I have people
100%.
randomly like, "Hey, I have a question. Like, I'm here, like, locally." I'm like, "All right, just ask a question. Come over. Like, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
come, it's not a big deal. I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
Happy to help." And then just go do your next thing.
Take action. Yeah. Take the next step, whatever that next step is. All right. And last question, how can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah. So, Brian, again, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
I have a great short form podcast all on breaking habits, building a foundation so you can magnify the success you deserve to have called Live 100. You can go over there and just listen to that. And if you want to connect more, go to jasonyarusi.com. There's a free ebook there on breaking through bad habits.
Awesome. Awesome. Speaking of habits, I just remembered last time you were on the podcast, you mentioned the 4-3-2-1. Are you
Yes,
still
sir.
working at waking up at what we
Still
wake up
there, 4:32.
at
Make it happen.
4:32 every
Yeah.
morning?
It's
Four
not a
three
perfect every day, but it's more
two
perfect than
one.
less perfect, right?
Awesome. Awesome. So Live 100. Okay. So we'll put a link to the Live 100 podcast in the show notes for anybody interested in that one. And he said it, he said, hey, if you have questions, give him a shout out. But anyway,
Mhm.
Jason, thanks for coming on the show. Very much appreciate it. And I'm going to look up that Live 100 podcast myself
Let's
today.
go.
So,
Awesome.
all right, cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.